Let's do it. Let's get right out to him and welcome Rory Karpf to the show. And the 30 for 30 is entitled Nature Boy. And Rory, good to have you on Sports Talk here in El Paso. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Doing well.
I think a lot of people in town are excited about tomorrow night for so many different reasons, Rory. El Paso is a very big wrestling community, like a lot of places around the country. But since this is the home of the Guerreros, and, Rick has wrestled in El Paso numerous times over the years. But more importantly, he's really one of the great figures in sports entertainment. And I'm sure for you, probably a no-brainer once ESPN decided that they wanted to, profile his life story.
I mean, I grew up outside Philadelphia, which is a huge wrestling city, birth of ECW. And as a little kid, I loved wrestling. And I would beg my dad to take me to see the NWA and Ric Flair. And he's such a, he's relevant now. He's arguably more relevant now than ever. Yeah. Athletes quote him, rap stars are making songs about him. Post Malone was at Rick's house last week. I know you guys are probably huge Post Malone fans. But this guy is very popular in the hip-hop community, and he loves Rick. So, yeah, like you said, it's a no-brainer. No-brainer for me as a childhood wrestling fan, but also as a filmmaker.
As you started to prepare yourself for this project, and then you had your first meeting and sit downs with Rick, could you tell almost immediately that the man has lived his gimmick all these years as a wrestler?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Ric Flair and the Nature Boy, and they're one and the same. I don't think he's playing a character. I really don't. It's who he is. And I've gone out drinking with Ric Flair, and it was wild. The night ended early, ended at like 7:30. That's how 68-year-old Ric Flair rolls. But from 4 o'clock to 7:30, it was pretty out of control. So seriously, he's like you said, he lives his gimmick, man, and that's what made him great. But at the same time, arguably, it was his greatest weakness in his personal life.
If you want to tweet us a question for Rory Karpf, who's with us right now, you can do so at 600 ESPN El Paso as we continue tomorrow night. 30 for 30 will debut 8 o'clock here in El Paso on ESPN. Nature Boy is the name of the documentary as we continue here talking about this particular piece. What impressed me so much, and I don't want to give away spoilers, and I want people to watch it tomorrow and really enjoy it, but he was brutally honest. Didn't seem like he really shied away from anything. And again, this was not the most uplifting 30 for 30, Rory. It's true to life, but it's also, this is a pretty sad piece.
Well, I guess that's in the eye of the beholder for sure. I mean, there's certainly tragedy in Rick's life. He lost his son. I think that's paying the ultimate price. But there's some humor in there for sure. We tried to sprinkle in some humor, and
right.
With Rick's daughter Ashley, he's kind of gotten a second lease on life with wrestling, but for sure, there's definitely some sadness and tragedy in Rick's life, and hopefully the film, it has a lot of ups and downs, kind of like Rick, and we want to take you on an emotional roller coaster ride.
You guys do. I think that's if that was the goal, that's exactly what you were able to accomplish. You threw some really good questions at him too, and it wasn't as if Rick ever dodged a bullet. He took every question right, answered it the way you would expect, and I noticed that you didn't only have one sit down with him. You were able to talk to him a couple of different times over the course of the period that you ended up putting this together.
Yeah, we did 2 big interviews with Rick. He was the very first interview we did for the film, and he was the very last interview we did for the film. And then kind of sandwiched in between are a bunch of other wrestlers and personalities and whatnot. And that really helped. And I kind of like to do things that way, if possible, if we're going to do more than one interview. And yeah, he was really open. I mean, he wanted to do a good job. He really liked ESPN. He wanted to be open. He wanted to be forthcoming. But, what happens a lot of times with anyone that kind of gets a little bit up there in age is they start to just repeat the same stories you've heard before. So I just wanted to try to get him to kind of, go beneath the surface a little bit, dig a little deeper, and as he said, maybe probe and prod him a little bit. And that's where he eventually went to how many women he slept with, which was pretty revealing in the film. He kind of got impressed that he says he slept with 10,000 women, which might not be a big number for you guys, but for me, that caught me off guard, and is an impressive number.
Especially considering he was married all those years. That was even better. And
yeah,
I think
that's kind of disgusting, but yeah, for sure. It's, you're exactly right. He was married all those years, and I love his reaction about being monogamous. He's acting as if like I'm asking him to eat like an insect on live television. Like, ugh, monogamy. Yeah, disgusting. So I don't know. Yeah, it's for sure. He settled down now. I like how he settled down now. Yeah, you almost died, and you're rounding 70. So that might be a good time to settle down. But for a long time, he was going all out.
By the way, that had to pretty much scare you and everybody else, realizing that he might not have been around to see his documentary air after what happened a few months ago.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I remember we were on a phone call once, and the film got pushed back. And he was getting frustrated because he thought it was going to air sooner than it was. And originally, they were actually talking about maybe airing it around like the Super Bowl next year. And he's like, he actually said this. He's like, I won't be alive to see it then. I'm not going to make it. This isn't when he was even sick. And I was like, well, don't say that. And then like a month or two later, he fell ill, and it wasn't looking very good for a while. But he pulled through. I mean, this is a guy that survived a plane crash. He was struck by lightning. He's gone through a lot of stuff in his life, and he's doing better now. We had a premiere for the film in Atlanta, and he actually said one of the things that helped him pull through health-wise was this film. He wanted people to see it, and he wanted to be alive to see people's reaction to it.
Yep, absolutely. By the way, Rory, and just so I know, how much time do you have with us? Because I'm sure you're busy doing these all day. How much do you have before you have to get ready for your next one?
I'm all right. I don't think my next one is until 7 o'clock Eastern time.
Great.
And I have my kids, and they're just they're hanging out
then let me
on their electronics, so they're
awesome.
good.
I've got a couple of questions from our listeners on Twitter I want to get to you. So we're going to come back more with Rory Karpf as we continue live discussing tomorrow's 30 for 30 Nature Boy. But right now, let's get over to Sal and get ourselves an in-show Sports Center update here at the bottom of the hour. Good job, Sal. Appreciate that. Again, continuing our conversation right now with Rory Karpf, who, again, has directed I Hate Christian Laettner, The Book of Manning, and now will have his latest 30 for 30 documentary, Nature Boy, 8 o'clock here in El Paso. It debuts tomorrow night on ESPN. A couple questions coming in. Let's get to this one first from Yin Yang Samurai. He wants to know how much actual footage ultimately had to be edited to give us the final product tomorrow.
A lot. I mean, Rick wrestled for like 40 years. So that's a lot of archival footage to go through, a lot of matches, a lot of promos. That was the hardest part for me. He has so many good promos from the 80s and the 90s. And sometimes you remember someone from your childhood, and they're not as good as you remembered. But Rick was better than I remembered as a kid. And there were some tough decisions. Tough decisions with people we interviewed, too. Some people were incredible interviews and just wound up not fitting into the film, like Jim Harbaugh, Luke Perry we interviewed, Mick Foley. So there were some tough choices.
Was Vince McMahon pretty accommodating as far as all of the archive footage?
His people were, for sure. I never really dealt with Vince very much, but Triple H was kind of the person I dealt with directly. He's really Rick's best friend, or one of them, and he was incredibly accommodating throughout the entire process.
That's awesome. Another question that's coming in right now from Sportstalk. Carlos, he wants to know, who did Rick enjoy working with more, Barry Windham or Ricky Steamboat?
Well, yeah, I mean, he says his favorite opponent was Ricky Steamboat, and we kind of get into that in the film. And I think the two of them kind of almost took wrestling, at least in the United States, to a new level of athleticism that hadn't been seen before. It kind of really came across like a sport, and we document that in the film.
Raywork Productions wants to know, was there anything off limits, Rory, he didn't want to talk about wrestling-wise?
No, nothing really off limits. There were things that I think made him a little uncomfortable in his personal life talking about it, but we went into it. There was really no subject off limits, and he and I have become friends, and I told him, we weren't going to whitewash anything, and sometimes friends tell each other hard truths. And he was very open, to his credit. And when we screened the film, he was very open. I mean, there were some things that were tough for him to watch. And some people say things that, so when we were watching, he would be like, oh, that's BS, or, blah, blah, blah. But never once was he like, hey, can you take this out?
Wow, that's great. And as far as, you mentioned all the extras that you could have kept, will there be a director's cut available that will have a lot more than what we're going to be seeing tomorrow night?
Well, if ESPN's willing to pay more money, definitely. I'm also not looking to do extra work, so we'll have to see.
And you know what? You've had a couple of other great 30 for 30s to your credit. I mentioned them earlier with I Hate Christian Laettner and the Book of Manning. Was this one? Do you ever look back and say which projects are easier or more difficult when you finally put it all together? Or do they all just feel like they're the same for you?
Man, they're never the same. I mean, the truth is, it really is a minor miracle, like anything ever makes it to air. And I'm not kidding. I mean, there's so many things that happen that people just don't know about. And I mean, you mentioned Rick getting sick, and this was a 2-year process. We went through a bunch of rough cuts. And there's all kinds of problems. I remember Archie Manning called me up twice and canceled the film for the Book of Manning. And one time we were already filming, and he was like, "Hey, Cor, sorry, I'm not going to do it." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? You can't just bail on me at this point." He's like, "Can't do it, Corey." And then he just hung up on me. I'm like, "Well, my name's Rory, first of all, not Corey." But yeah, then finally it got done, and he was great. And yeah, man, it's tough. I remember Christian Laettner's mom called me up upset about the title of the film. She left me this long voicemail, kind of chewing me out. And Christian's like, "Yeah, we got to change the title. My mom's upset." I'm like, "Dude, we just announced the title of the film in a press release. I'm sorry your mom's upset, but you got to handle this one, okay?" I went over his mom's house, had to explain it to her. Yeah, so there's always behind the scenes things that could maybe be a documentary in and of itself.
Yeah, first off, Laettner's mom should be honored that the title was called "I Hate Christian Laettner." That's about the greatest tribute you could say to a star player, that you can't stand them because they beat you so many times.
His mom sent me one of the nicest cards. I saved it, actually. And because she really was, first of all, she didn't want to be interviewed in the film. I think she said it was stupid, was the exact phrase she used. I'm like, "Stupid? You haven't even seen it yet." So we got an interview with her, and then she was very much against it. But then she watched it, and she sent me a card that the first time she watched it, she tolerated it. And the second time she watched it, she kind of understood. And the third time, she loved it. And then she said, "I hope your children are lucky to have a champion like you for their father," which I thought was a really nice thing to say. I actually brought my kids over to her place when I met with them. I bring my kids around sometimes just to elicit empathy. I figure someone won't throw me out if I have a 5-year-old with me. But I was actually with them that day, and we stopped by. So it all worked out. It always works out in the end.
Very nice. A lot of questions are still pouring in right now. Let's see here. Not drafted by the MLB tweets in. Rory, what was the funniest moment in Rick's interviews?
The funniest moment in his interviews. I mean, he tells some great stories. I'll tell you what was funny. He reveals in the film that he slept with 10,000 women, right? He also reveals in the film that he masturbated twice a day. So I'm like, that's a lot of sexual stuff, And I mean, that's like a compulsion. And I had an actual disagreement with the executive at ESPN. He's like, I think we should lose the masturbation reference. And he and I are just texting back and forth in this heated conversation. I'm like, someone needs to publish these texts. Because they would think it wasn't real. Like, he and I are just going in. I'm like, oh, man, I showed my friend the masturbation sequence, and he thinks it's got to stay. And the guy's like, I just showed this to my wife, and she thinks we can lose it. And I'm just like, oh, my gosh. So, again, it's the little things you don't see. And it's, man, Rick, he's got a drive in and out of the ring, for sure.
There's no doubt about that. As far as other wrestlers, Baba Booey tweets in, Rory, who else goes on the wrestling Mount Rushmore with Nature Boy? And will there be any 30 for 30s with them?
I love Baba Booey. Other wrestlers. I mean, on my Mount Rushmore, it's got to be Hulk Hogan. Has to be Ric Flair, for sure. I got to say Stone Cold and The Rock. I mean, to me, those are the four faces of wrestling that kind of transcend everything else. And I'm definitely down with doing a film on The Rock or directing a film with The Rock. And I'd love to do something on Hulk Hogan. I mean, I think there still hasn't been a definitive Hulk Hogan film.
The question is, will you get Hulk Hogan to be as honest with you as Rick was? That's the biggest thing. Will he open up and be like that?
Hulk was pretty honest and forthcoming in this film with Rick. So, man, I don't know. You get people at the right time, the right age, and they're willing to open up and at least give you their truth. You know, everyone has their own version of events of how things happen. So, you know, and everyone lives their own truth more or less. So I'd love to do something on Hulk Hogan. I think he was great in this film.
I'll tell you something else he was. He said something that I thought was terrific, and that was just talking about what a better wrestler Ric Flair was than him. And, you know, I think a lot of us already knew that, but to hear that come out of his mouth and just say it in the documentary that he didn't belong in the ring with him, I thought was really something to say.
Well, little known fact, how many people know this, and I'm not sure Hulk Hogan really wants to getting out, but I think Rick mentioned it. The first person to visit Ric Flair in the hospital was Hulk Hogan. He flew in actually twice to see him. The first time he saw him, I think he was unconscious. And he stayed with him and read Bible passages to him. I mean, you know, there's a side of this guy that many people don't see. I think that's true with a lot of big celebrities. You know, it's very easy to just label someone from afar and from a distance and pretend that you know them. People are judgmental, but the very first person to visit Rick in the hospital was Hulk Hogan.
Sportstalk Carlos tweets in, is Rick's run in TNA covered, and will there be any Chris Benoit mentions?
Rick's run in TNA is covered, and there are no Chris Benoit mentions.
Okay. Eddie Lovano at Z915 tweets in, Rory, what is your favorite sports memorabilia given to you?
My favorite sports memorabilia given to me. This is, I don't know how much sports this is, but Snoop Dogg gave me a gold chain, and we were filming our series that airs in January about Snoop as a coach. So in that role, he was a football coach, and I love that necklace, and I wear it around a lot. And the reason he gave it to me is actually, while we were filming, the audio guy said Snoop's chains were making too much noise against his mic, and he asked me if I could go tell him to take his chains off, which is really comfortable thing to go do. Go ask a rap superstar to take off his bling. So I did, and after he cursed me out a little bit, he gave me the chains. And I think he felt guilty about cussing me out and let me keep one, which was really cool.
That is very cool. Last question. When people are done watching The Nature Boy, what do you think is the one thing they will get out of it that they probably didn't expect heading into the documentary?
I think it's very emotional. That's what people have told me. You know, my first job out of school was working with Steve Sable at NFL Films. And Steve said, first you make them laugh and then you make them cry. Because when you make someone laugh, it brings their defenses down and they're more open to crying. And I always remembered that. So I think in this film, hopefully there's a lot of big laughs, and then towards the end, there's some tears to be shed.
Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, folks. We'll have it for you, 30 for 30 on ESPN. Rory, terrific stuff. Congratulations on the piece, and I know all my listeners are really looking forward to it. It's the most tweets I've ever had for a guest during one of these segments. So well done on that, and thanks for being so generous with your time here in El Paso.
Hey, thanks for having me on, and I hope your audience loves the film, and if they don't, please direct all hate mail to you guys. Okay?
We'll make sure we take care of that and not forward that to you. No worries.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Follow him on Twitter at Rory Karpf, folks, at Rory Karpf. Again, the documentary, Nature Boy. Great stuff. We appreciate his time joining us here in our first hour on the program.